All in the Family debuted on CBS, introducing a trend in socially conscious programming, while the U.S. Supreme Court rules unanimously that busing of students may be ordered to achieve racial desegregation. Susan Minch, former St. Lucie County School Board member and teacher, recalls the busing challenges.
In 1970, a court order was sent to the superintendent, J. Walter Hebb, and the board, telling them that they must immediately integrate the St. Lucie County schools to a greater degree.
It ended up being one of the most restrictive court orders in the state, if not in the nation.
Fort Pierce Central became the county's only high school, and that is really when we began to have a lot of racial tension in St. Lucie County. And what brought it about was the students from Dan McCarty, which was the predominantly white school, and the students from Lincoln Park, which was an all-black school. They were merged together into what became Fort Pierce Central High School.
We had very hard time learning anything because there was just so much turmoil.
Fights were constantly in the bathrooms and in the hallways.
It was just a very, very difficult time for everyone because you had two communities, and there were little to no schools in Port St. Lucie. At first, of course, everybody was bused to Fort Pierce from Port St. Lucie.
This came to a head, and there was going to be a confrontation. And this was on I believe, a Thursday. Well, we came to school, and there was every black student on one end, and on the other end was an equal amount of whites. There was nothing going on but shouting back and forth to each other, and then the principal announced, "Go to your class." When that principal announced the second time, all of a sudden the whites were like 1/3 to what the blacks were. And we're looking at each other like, well, I think maybe we ought to go to class too now, because, I mean, you know when you're licked. While we were splitting up, he gave the third warning. He says, "That's it." We got to our class, and the next thing we know, out of the woods, we didn't know that the police were sitting out there waiting. I watched from the second story. They hit that crowd of blacks, one with a dog, one with a tear gas gun, and the other one's carrying a bat. The tear gas was flowing. That's what Kurt was talking about. I mean, they were shooting that stuff, and it would just float up into the air and go
to the classrooms,
into the classrooms, and everybody's got tears in their eyes. But the kids on the ground, I mean, they took the brunt of that tear gas, and I don't think it was right the way they did it. They could have broke up the crowd, but when they broke them up, you could see that guy with the baton just whacking them.
And the National Guards were called in, and they shut the campus down.
I could not take it anymore. I called my mother up and I said, "You know, Mom, I'm leaving and I'm not coming back to this school again." I said, "I'll get a diploma somehow, but I just can't do this anymore." Just so frightening. I couldn't take it.
Through some great leadership, they had a biracial committee that came together to start working on some of the problems that these students in the community were having. And Fort Pierce Central had a football team, and it literally changed my life. I went out for the team, and we became undefeated, Florida 4A state champion. And what happened in Fort Pierce during that time that helped ease the racial tensions were that a group of businessmen came together and built what is known now as Lawnwood Stadium. And we played football in that stadium, and blacks and whites went to that stadium and cheered for that team. And it was very difficult for those people to be united behind that team in that stadium and not be united into the community.
As time went on, the students suggested, faculty members suggested, and St. Lucie County began their efforts to integrate the schools to a great degree and for the benefit of the young people.
It was a prime example of people reaching out to each other, finding out what we have in common, how we can live in this world together and make this world a better place. And I am very proud of where we have come from as a community.
We moved down here as a family in 1977. Back in '77, there was only one street light and I think 2 gas stations.
Chris was 4 years old, 4.5 years old, and he went around knocking on doors asking if there were any children that lived in the neighborhood because he wanted somebody to play with. And everybody was wondering, oh my goodness, here we are in a small town.
And in 1980, while President Ronald Reagan was elected 40th President of the United States, the population was 14,690. And as Port St. Lucie grew rapidly, greater problems of maintaining integration began to occur.
Every time the community grew, you had to open a school, and every time you opened a school, you had to rezone, which meant that, quite honestly, kids could have gone in elementary school to 4 elementary schools in 5 years.
I remember trying to follow the court order. We had 13 little black children from the Fort Pierce area ride miles and miles, minutes and minutes, to come to Windmill Point Elementary, while 13 little white children that lived in the Windmill Point area rode all the way to Fort Pierce.
It was also the time where the first magnet schools were implemented, and the magnet schools were developed nationwide as an instrument for desegregation.
In order to ease the bus rides and to try and better integrate, we would create schools that would be voluntarily integrated, such as our now quite famous Lincoln Park Academy, Village Green Elementary, F.K. Sweet Elementary, Fairlawn Elementary.
Ultimately, we came across controlled choice. We went back to Judge Atkins with a controlled choice proposal, and he accepted it, the only thing he accepted. And while none of us felt like that was the perfect answer to integrating our schools, it was our answer for a time, and ultimately we achieved unitary status.